The wind came low off the hills, a dry rattle in the cottonwoods that skirted the McKay property line. Mornings out here didn't bloom, they bled. A slow light stretched across frostbitten pasture and broken fence posts. The land was still asleep, but Ethan McKay had already been up for 2 hours, digging a trench to divert water that hadn't come in 6 months. He worked as if the earth owed him something. His right hand was knotted stiff from a break that healed wrong after a bull took him down 3 years ago. That bull was dead now. So was the herd. Drought took the cattle, infection took his wife, and the Lord took whatever hope Ethan once carried. What he had left was a house too quiet and boots that didn't wear out fast enough. That morning, after turning the spade into hard clay and thinking about setting fire to the whole barn just to feel something warm again, Ethan rode to town for salt and nails. He avoided conversation like a sickness, answered only what had to be answered. His hat brim was low, his eyes lower. He didn't hear the girl crying behind the rail depot until he was nearly on top of her. She was sitting on a steamer trunk, bent forward, her face hidden by the bonnet she hadn't taken off, her shoulders hitched up like a bird too cold to fly. Around her were two parcels wrapped in wax cloth and a small wooden box painted with blue flowers faded by sun. She heard his boots, stilled, and then straightened, not wiping her eyes. He knew her type, mail order, left behind. Most men didn't want a bride who came with a flaw already stitched into her gait, and this girl had a limp so soft it took watching twice to notice. She stood to meet his gaze and didn't flinch when she saw how ruined his face was on the right side, a branding accident or a bar fight depending on who you asked. The skin there stayed red year-round, as if still seared. "Name?" he asked. Her mouth twitched. "Clara." "No last name." She shook her head once. "Don't need it." He nodded. "You eat?" "No." He looked back toward his horse, then toward her trunk. "That all yours?" She nodded. "You got anywhere else to go?" "No." "Then come on." She didn't ask his name. She only gathered her things and followed him like a dog that had known enough kicks to tell the difference between a boot and a hand. It took her 5 minutes to get on the horse behind him, stiff from travel and favoring the leg. He felt her hesitate before placing her hands lightly on his sides. The ride back was wordless. The land rolled out empty in all directions, a flat hush hanging over everything. She didn't ask what kind of man brought home a woman he didn't know, and he didn't ask what kind of woman got sent back like faulty goods. They rode under the weight of things not spoken. The house was squat and gray with wind damage on the eaves. Inside, it smelled of cedar, leather, and grief. He lit a lamp and set water to boil. She didn't wander, didn't sit, just stood inside the door with her bag in her hands. "You can stay," he said. "Only thing I ask is you don't expect talk. I don't do well with it." She nodded. "Spare room there. I'll clear it tomorrow." "Thank you." He turned toward the stove. Her voice stopped him. "You want me to sign anything?" He looked back at her. Her jaw was tight with shame or pride, he couldn't tell. "Don't need to," he said. "We're married now." She blinked once. He could see her swallow. They said nothing else that night. Clara kept to the kitchen at first. She scrubbed old surfaces until her hands turned raw, swept corners even mice had abandoned. She never asked what happened to the woman whose dresses were still hanging in the wardrobe. Ethan never told her. Some things in a house stay quiet because they have to. The dead have their own gravity. She cooked well, though she didn't eat much, walked slowly, favoring the left leg, but never sat down while working. Ethan watched her sometimes when she was kneeling by the hearth or hauling water from the pump, not out of interest, but curiosity. He had expected less backbone. A girl that got sent back wasn't supposed to look you in the eye. One night the pump failed. Clara brought in a pail of muddy runoff and a set of tools wrapped in oilskin. "You going to fix that?" Ethan asked from the table. She looked up. "I can try." "You know pumps." "My father did," I watched. He grunted. She went back out, lantern swaying at her side. He followed without thinking, stood just off her shoulder while she knelt in the dark with her fingers deep in the iron mouth. The wind stirred her dress against her legs. She didn't look back at him, but he saw the corner of her mouth twitch in what might have been a smile. The pump creaked to life after an hour. Water ran brown for a moment, then clear. "Good," she said simply. "You can stay," he told her again. "I know." After that, she started keeping the books. She could read and write better than he could. When she sat at the table tallying dry goods and what little stock they had, he'd sometimes catch her humming, soft as moth wings. It startled him. There been no sound like that in the house for years. By month's end, they shared the same room. He didn't ask, she didn't explain. She came in after washing, lay down on top of the quilt, and turned her face toward the wall. He joined her, silent, grateful, hollow. That first winter together, they said fewer than 200 words. But something in the silence began to bend, not break, not thaw, just bend. In town, words circled. The broken rancher and the crippled girl. Some said he must have gone soft in the head. Others claimed she was clever, that she'd spun some story to trick him into pity. Ethan heard it. Clara heard it. Neither gave answer. But one morning at the milliner's, when Mrs. Hatch commented loud enough for half the street to hear, something about how nice it must be not to have to earn your keep if you just limp hard enough, Clara turned slowly, looked the woman in the eye, and said, "My limp came from dragging my sister out of a house fire in Missouri. She died on the road. I don't mind my scar. You should mind your mouth." She left her thread and buttons behind, walked the full mile back to the homestead. When Ethan got home that night, she was fixing fence line with a length of wire clenched between her teeth. He didn't say anything, but after that day, he started sitting closer at meals, and she started leaving her bonnet off in the house. In early spring, a letter arrived postmarked from Helena. He didn't read it right away. It sat on the mantel 2 days before Clara asked if she could open it. She read it slowly, mouth thin, then passed it to him. It was from a lawyer. His father was dead. The family ranch, long since abandoned, had passed to Ethan, unworked, unguarded, and worthless, except it was. The land sat above a dry creek that had just been surveyed for ore. Silver, maybe. "You want to go back?" Clara asked. Ethan looked at her. "Do you?" "I don't have anything left in the east. I don't have anything left here." They packed what little they had, sold the house for almost nothing, and headed north. The wind carried the smell of thawing earth. Neither of them looked back. The trail north was mean-spirited. Late snowstorms hung around like unwanted company, and the wagon axle cracked twice before they reached Helena. Ethan rode most of it on horseback, Clara tucked into blankets in the cart bed with the account books and a shotgun across her knees. She didn't complain, not when her legs stiffened from the cold, not when her fingers split from the dry air. If she hurt quiet. They passed through towns with names that sounded like warnings: Rattleskin, Devil's End, Mercy Bluff. The nights were long and firewood scarce. Ethan hunted squirrel and jackrabbit. Clara skinned them without blinking, sleeves rolled to the elbow, hands steady. She learned something hard before she ever met him. He saw that now. By the time they reached the old McKay land, spring had half bloomed and then thought better of it. The place hadn't been worked in over a decade. The main house sagged inward at the middle, roof torn open like a wound. No fences remained. The barn was a skeleton, but there was water now, glinting in the creek bed, shallow but running. And men nearby had been talking about silver. Claims were going up like weeds. They camped the first night in what used to be the smokehouse. Ethan said little, just lit a fire and stared into it while Clara sorted their supplies with deliberate hands. "You think it's worth it?" she asked after a while. "No," he said, "but it's ours." That was enough. By summer, they'd built a cabin on the edge of the creek. Not much, single room, no glass, packed dirt floor, but it held. Ethan felled trees until his hands split. Clara sewed linens from grain sacks and boiled every rock in the chimney to leach the smell of rot from the mortar. She stopped limping as much. Maybe it was the dry air, or maybe she just refused to show pain where no one would pity her. She carried water like a man, shot better than most ranch hands Ethan had known, still didn't speak unless there was need. They slept on opposite ends of the same room. When storms came, and they came often, she'd sit up by the fire and hum low to herself, no tune Ethan recognized. He didn't ask. He liked the way it filled the room without demanding anything. Miners started showing up in the valley come July, filthy, sharp-eyed men with stories behind every tooth missing. Ethan didn't trust them, but he dealt with them. Sold timber, lent his tools, fixed a bridge downstream for 2 ounces of flake silver. He didn't stake a claim himself, said the land would bleed when it was ready. Clara did the trading, rode into town once a week and bartered cloth, soap, sometimes eggs if the hens were feeling generous. She didn't smile, didn't haggle, but the shopkeepers knew better than to cheat her. One tried, overcharged her for coffee, and gave back shaved coins. She returned the next day with a shovel and the receipt and stood silent in the store until the man gave her full weight. After that, folks looked her in the eye when they spoke. That summer, she started sleeping closer to the fire. Some nights when she didn't think he was watching, Ethan would see her rubbing her left thigh, teeth clenched, scar tissue probably, nerve damage. He wanted to ask what happened, where the limp came from truly, but never did. They made a life without the past. Still, silence has weight. One evening she handed him a letter, yellowed and sealed in wax. "It's from before," she said. "You can read it if you want." He took it, held it a long while, then handed it back. "I don't need to." She nodded, tucked it into the wall behind a loose board, and that was that. Autumn arrived with blood in its teeth. The ore rush brought lawless men. 3 drifters came through one night, claiming to be looking for a place to sleep. Ethan turned them away, but they circled back after dark. He woke to the sound of glass breaking, though there was no glass, and Clara whispering his name through the dark. He got up slow, took the rifle. The first man died in the doorway. The second ran when Clara fired a warning shot that took bark off the pine he was hiding behind. The third tried to use her as cover, grabbing her from behind near the well. Her left leg gave, but not before she sank a knife into his side. They buried him in shallow ground. That night, Ethan cleaned the blood off her boots while she sat in silence. "You did right," he said. She didn't answer. The next day, they dug a trench around the cabin and posted wire. Clara strung bells from the trees using copper line and carved small crosses into the doorframe, not for protection, for warning. The limp came back worse after that, but she didn't slow. Ethan noticed, for the first time, the callus forming across her knuckles. The way she kept her knife on her body now, not just nearby, she was hardening, and he wasn't sure if it was because of him or despite him. In late October, a man rode in wearing a suit too clean for the road and a face too soft for this country. "Miss Clara Everett?" he asked. Ethan answered the door. "No Clara here." "I have documents," the man insisted. "She was engaged once to a Mr. Davis out of Topeka. The family is pursuing charges of fraud. Seems she took money and never married." Clara stepped behind Ethan, face calm. "That true?" Ethan asked her. "No," she said. "They tried to sell me." The man looked confused. "Ma'am, that's not what." She stepped forward, raised her hand, and pointed to the edge of the creek. "You can turn your horse around now." He didn't. So Ethan shut the door in his face. They heard gunfire 2 nights later, not near but not far enough. A claim dispute turned ugly in the hills. When the fire died down, there were 6 dead and 1 man hanging upside down from a cottonwood, silver coins shoved into his mouth. Clara didn't speak of it, but she sat up that night, staring out the window with the shotgun across her lap. Ethan watched her. Wondered what it took to make a woman carry silence like that, sharp enough to draw blood. She didn't hum again after that night. And when snow came early, she didn't stop walking the perimeter, even when her limp turned to a stagger. Whatever she was becoming, she wasn't done yet. Winter dug in deep, the kind that turned fence wire brittle and made firewood burn too fast. The mountains went white and the trail to town disappeared under drift and ice. They rationed everything: beans, flour, bullets. Clara cut old curtains into bandages and lined their boots with rabbit hide. The stove never went cold, neither did the fear. One morning, she woke before dawn and found Ethan sitting by the door with a rifle across his lap, staring into the dark as if waiting for something he'd seen before. "They'll come back," he said. "Not those 3, but others like 'em." Clara didn't argue. She wrapped her shawl tight and lit the fire again. By mid-January, the creek froze solid. Ethan hacked a hole through the ice for water. Clara spent hours each day writing in a ledger long entries in neat, looping script. He never looked, but he noticed she only wrote when the wind howled loud enough to cover the sound of memory. They slept back to back, not touching, not speaking. But there was a heat between them now, heavy and unspoken, like coals buried in ash, still alive. Then one day she fell. She was carrying kindling back from the woodpile, slipped on packed snow, and landed hard. Ethan got to her before she tried to rise. Her face was stone. "Don't help me," she said. "You're hurt." She twisted away from his hand. "It's just my leg." He didn't press her, not then. But later, when she tried to stand again and couldn't, he lifted her anyway and carried her inside. She didn't speak, didn't thank him. But that night, when he checked the perimeter, he returned to find her asleep in his bed, jaw tight, arms folded over her ribs like she was bracing for something worse than pain. He didn't move her, just sat in the chair and watched the fire burn low. February brought letters. Miners scrawled notes and nailed them to the fence post near the cabin. They wanted rights, access, passage through the McKay land to reach the southern bend of the creek where new veins had been found. Clara burned the first letter, then the second. The third came with a gold coin inside. She kept that one, didn't spend it, just nailed it to the door above the latch, a warning or a promise. Ethan asked, "You plan on selling?" "No." "You want to run them off?" "No." He waited. "I want them to think I might," she said. "That's enough." He nodded. She knew how to play the long game. That same week, a fire broke out down in the gulch. A claim shack went up with 3 men inside. The snow kept the fire from spreading, but not before it left behind black stumps and blistered stone. No one saw who did it. No one asked. But the coin stayed nailed to the door. And no more letters came. Clara started walking better again come March. She wrapped her knee each morning with a strip of cloth soaked in birch oil, tied it off with twine, and limped less with every passing week. But her eyes had changed. They were sharper now, hungrier. One afternoon, she rode into Helena alone and came back with 5 spools of wire, a coil of fencing nails, and a deed signed by the local judge. She laid it flat on the table and pointed to the western ridge. "That's ours now, too." Ethan looked at the signature, then at her. "You bought it." "No," she said, "I traded." "For what?" "My name." He said nothing. She rolled the deed up and put it under the floorboards with the ledgers. That night she crawled into bed beside him and didn't turn away. She kissed him once, dry-lipped, unsentimental, and laid her head on his shoulder. They didn't speak, but something settled between them, something older than forgiveness. April thawed the valley into a slur of mud and birch pollen. The creek swelled. Tracks returned, coyote, elk, men. They found boot prints near the south fence. Clara posted a sign made of barnwood, trespass and bleed. Ethan watched her hammer it in, watched how steady her hand was. "She's still out there?" he asked that night. Clara sat near the fire, polishing the barrel of her shotgun with a cloth soaked in vinegar. "Who?" "The girl you were, the one that came limping off that depot trunk." Clara didn't look up. "She's buried, same place you left the man who hit you with branding iron, I'd guess." Ethan exhaled. He never told her about the scarring, she must have guessed. "That man's still alive," he said. Clara met his gaze. "Is he?" He thought about that, thought about the way his hand still didn't close right, the way his mouth twisted when he slept. "No," he said finally, "not really." She nodded once and went back to her work. Late spring brought trouble again, not from miners this time, but from the town council. A man named Corwin came riding up with 2 deputies, papers in hand, wanting to inspect the land for taxation. Claimed too many claims were being passed hand to hand without oversight. He had a ledger full of rules and a holster full of cowardice. Ethan stepped onto the porch. Clara stood behind him with the deed. "We own it," she said. Corwin smirked. "Ownership don't mean exemption. Territory law says you pay on all productive land, and I hear you've got men working it under table." Ethan said nothing. Clara folded the deed slowly. "You want coin?" she asked. "I want law," Corwin said. "Then bring law." He didn't like that. The next morning, a summons appeared nailed to the post. They were to come to Helena in 6 days for a hearing. Clara burned it on the stovetop. "We going?" Ethan asked. "No." They'll send someone. I hope they do. That night she took her knife apart, sharpened the blade, polished the handle, rebound the grip with oiled cord. Ethan watched her in silence. What happens if they don't back off? He asked. Clara looked up, her face unreadable in the firelight. Then we stop asking. 2 days later, a rider came. Fast, alone, no badge. Clara was the one who stepped out to meet him. They spoke for 10 minutes. Ethan didn't hear what was said, only saw the way her shoulders squared near the end, like she was bracing for something final. When she came back inside, she set a pouch on the table. Inside was a deed, this one for the creek itself, signed over to her. "What did you trade this time?" Ethan asked. "My silence." He nodded. "That man from Topeka." She nodded. "What did he do?" Clara's face was hard. "He married my sister first." Ethan said nothing for a long while. Finally he asked, "What happened to him?" Clara smiled, not kindly. "He's under the same stone she is." He didn't ask more. The next morning they tore down the warning signs. They didn't need them anymore. The creek whispered through the valley come June, swollen with meltwater and choked in places with silver-laced silt. Men still wandered through now and again, still asked questions about deeds and boundaries and claims. Clara would offer them coffee. She'd smile sometimes in that dry way of hers that didn't touch the eyes, but no one pushed her anymore. They all understood something unspoken, that this was a place where blood soaked deeper than water. Ethan built a mill wheel, set it low in the current and fed it slow with a handmade sluice. Clara kept the books, not just for their land but for others too. Word had spread. If you wanted fair numbers and a quiet tongue, you brought your ledgers to the woman with the limp and the eyes like polished stone. They paid her in coin, in sacks of flour, in bullets wrapped in cloth. She never shorted them, but she never forgot a name. When a man named Stoddard tried to forge a secondary claim on the East Ridge, Clara rode to his tent at dusk and laid his own fake signature in his lap. Said nothing. Just stood there until he folded it up, nodded, and packed before dawn. Ethan saw less of her after that. She was always off somewhere, checking boundaries, delivering receipts, redrawing maps with the surveyor. But when she came home, she left her boots beside his. She always came back. One night after too much smoke and too little rain, she stood in the doorway and looked out over their land. Said, quiet as breath, "You think we earned it?" Ethan didn't answer right away. "I think we outlasted it." That seemed enough for her. In July, a boy showed up at the edge of the property. No older than 16, rag-worn and hollow-eyed, cradling one arm against his chest like it was broken. Clara found him half dead under the cottonwood. She didn't call Ethan. She carried the boy into the cabin herself, laid him on the floor, and set to cleaning the wounds without asking his name. His forearm had been slashed deep, clumsily stitched with twine, already infected. Ethan came in to find her with both hands covered in blood, jaw tight, eyes sharp. "We're keeping him?" he asked. "Not a stray dog," she muttered, not looking up. "But yes." They worked in shifts over the next 2 days. The boy burned through fever, thrashed in his sleep, said names they didn't know. Once he whispered, "She told me I'd be safe." When the fever broke, Clara made broth from bone and herbs, fed him slow. He wouldn't meet her eyes, wouldn't speak, but he didn't try to leave. After a week, he told them his name was Jonah. She didn't press for more, neither did Ethan. Jonah stayed on, limping worse than Clara ever had, but with enough strength in him to fetch water, chop wood, fix hinges. He watched Clara like she was some kind of creature made from grit and smoke, and maybe she was. One day he asked, "Why'd you take me in?" She paused in her writing. "Someone has to stop the bleeding." That was all. August brought fire. Not wild, but set. The northern ridge lit up red one morning, black smoke clawing the sky. Someone had torched 2 claim tents and left a warning scratched into the bark of an aspen. "This land ain't clean." Clara read it once, burned the tree, then rode into Helena and didn't come back for 2 days. When she did return, she carried 3 things: a length of barbed chain, a notarized map with every Mackay boundary underlined in ink, and a look on her face that Ethan hadn't seen since that first day by the rail depot. She gave Jonah the chain, gave Ethan the map, said nothing about the bruises blooming along her ribs. But that night she sat on the porch and took Ethan's hand for the first time in plain sight. Jonah watched from the fence post, silent. "We're being bled," Ethan said. She nodded, then it's time to close the wound. Word spread fast after that. Claims got formal, boundaries turned teeth-sharp. A few men left the valley entirely, others stayed, but they spoke Clara's name with care now. No one questioned the land anymore. Ethan and Clara rebuilt the mill with steel braces. Jonah learned to track deer and shoot straight. They took in 2 more boys that winter, orphans from the burned-out camps, eyes full of soot and fear. Clara gave them names, taught them to read deeds, not just hold rifles. They weren't building a home, they were building a keep. Helena sent another representative. Not a judge this time, but a woman, thin, pale, eyes hard. She asked Clara for a ledger. Clara handed her 3. The woman looked over the pages, frowned. "Why do you keep such exact records?" Clara answered, "So no one forgets." She meant more than the land. Snow came early again, but it didn't stop the work. Jonah dug irrigation trenches. The younger boys learned to trap. Ethan taught them how to hold an axe without breaking a wrist. Clara oversaw everything with a quiet that made men nervous. One night after the boys had gone to sleep, Ethan and Clara sat beside the fire and spoke soft. "You think we'll keep it?" he asked. "This place?" He nodded. She thought a long time. "We might if no one forgets what it cost." Ethan looked at her, not the limp, not the knife, not the eyes hardened by betrayal or the scars she never named. Just her. He reached for her hand again. She let him. And for the first time, he thought maybe what they had was something that couldn't be burned out or bought up. Something deeper than vengeance. Something earned. Spring bled out slow the year the flood came. The creek rose heavy in the night, swollen from a week of rain thick as oil. Jonah was first to hear it, churning louder than it should, licking at the stones with hunger. He roused Ethan with a shake to the shoulder. Clara was already up, pulling her boots over bare feet, hair braided tight like she was going to war. The dam upstream had split, not all at once but in slow failure. Men had cut corners the summer before, tried to brace the sluice gate with rotten timber and prayer. It didn't hold. By morning, half the southern ridge was underwater. One of the boys, Tommy, not yet 12, stood chest-deep in the flood, clutching a goat under each arm, crying without sound. Ethan waded in after him. Clara built a fire high on the ridge and burned damp green wood so the smoke would guide any others left stranded. They lost the sluice mill, lost the back fence. The garden was gone, churned to black mud, but the cabin held, the boys held, Clara held. And when the sun broke over the soaked plain and lit the valley gold, she stood with her arms crossed over her chest, watching the water recede like she dared it to take more. Weeks passed, mud dried, what was broken got rebuilt, again. Clara worked quieter after the flood, not slower, just with more pause between tasks, as if something in her had begun to calculate not just what she could do, but what she should. She let Jonah handle the trading now, trusted him to measure salt against seed, to name what they had and what they could spare. And when the younger boys asked about boundaries or who owned which stretch of hillside, she didn't pull out the deed anymore. She took them to the edge and made them walk the lines themselves. "Land isn't paper," she told them, "it's weight." The town respected her now, some feared her. There were whispers she held ledgers on every man with dirt under his nails and sins behind his name. Maybe she did, but she didn't speak of them, and no one dared ask. Ethan watched her move through this world she'd shaped, and something quiet inside him, something coiled and shamed and long-starved, unwound. He no longer asked if she'd stay. He no longer wondered what brought her out west in the first place. It didn't matter. She was here, and she wasn't going anywhere. The letters stopped coming. So did the men with clean boots and forged papers. What Clara had done, how she'd held the line, claimed the ridge, outlasted every bastard who thought her weak, it settled into local legend. Some called her Widow McKay, though no one ever saw a funeral. Others called her Miss Clara, though not one of them had ever been invited to use her name. No one called her Cripple. Not anymore. She moved with a limp still. That would never leave her. But it was the gait of someone who'd survived fire and storm, betrayal and barter, and learned how to wield silence sharper than a blade. When she walked through town, no one looked away out of pity. They looked down out of reverence. Even the judge who once questioned her deed now handed over territory maps for her to mark corrections. Ethan watched it all unfold from the porch. Let her build whatever empire she wanted. He didn't need to understand the shape of it. He only needed to keep the gate latched and the stove hot and the boys taught well. That was his vow now. The morning the telegram came, the boys were out chasing coyotes from the chicken yard. Clara read it once, her face unmoved. Then she folded the slip of paper and placed it in the same wall crack where she'd once hidden the old letter from Topeka. She stood quiet for a moment, then said, "He's dead." Ethan didn't ask who. She turned to him, her eyes dry but heavy. "No blood left to pay," she said. "Not for me." He stepped to her, touched her shoulder. "And what now?" She looked around, at the fence lines and the distant trees, at the boys in the yard and the wheel half-built in the shed. "Now we build." Summer turned to fall. The cabin grew 2 rooms now, a porch wide enough for drying herbs and resting rifles. The boys got taller, stronger. Jonah grew into his name, wore his scars proud, and spoke with Clara's kind of silence. People started sending their own young out to be taught on the ridge, called it an apprenticeship, but they came for more than trade skills. They came for steel. Clara wrote less, talked more, only a little but enough to pass on the weight. The younger ones listened close. They knew what she was. Not just a woman who'd survived the cruelty of men. Not just a rancher who turned scrub land into coin. She was proof. That rejection could be armor. That scars were a kind of scripture. That the weak, once overlooked, once left to rot behind depots and under contracts, could rise, not to forgive, but to endure, to rule, to outlast. Clara limped to the end of every row she planted, carried her burden without apology, loved without needing soft words or clean ends. She'd been given no mercy, and so she asked for none. She gave only what she'd earned. And Ethan, the broken rancher, who'd once dragged his shadow behind him like a chain, knew he had lived long enough to see something holy made from ruin. Not a wife, not just. Something larger. Someone remembered. And together they watched the land keep growing.